If your husband grabbed your hair and shoved your face into your own daughter's birthday cake in front of 47 guests, while your mother-in-law stood there smiling, and his mistress pulled out her phone to record, what would you do? Cry and beg? Scream and rage? Fight back? Meredith did none of that. She stood up. Pink frosting covered her face like a mask of humiliation. 47 pairs of eyes stared at her. No one spoke. No one reached out. She bent down, scooped a bit of frosting from her own cheek, and gently touched it to her sobbing little daughter's lips. Is it sweet, baby? The child nodded, tears still streaming down her face. Meredith smiled at her daughter. Then she picked her up and walked inside. Back straight, head high, without a single word. The door closed quietly behind her. Her mother-in-law turned and whispered to her sister-in-law, "It's about time." They thought she was weak. They thought she had no one. They thought she would silently endure forever. But they didn't know that. Standing in the corner of the yard, there was a man watching her, and that man had just decided to destroy everyone who made her cry. Sometimes, the quietest people hold the loudest power. If you want to see what Meredith did to those who humiliated her, hit that like button and subscribe right now. And don't forget to share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Let me turn the clock back a little, to about 30 minutes before everything happened. Edmund Cross stepped into the backyard of the rented house in the suburbs of Chicago with Richard Holloway, a longtime business associate. Richard was the neighbor of Bradley Norton's family, and he had invited Edmund to attend the little neighbor girl's 4th birthday party as a way to reconnect after their afternoon meeting. Edmund didn't like parties like this. Too many strangers, too much fake laughter, too many meaningless conversations. But Richard was an important partner, and Edmund understood that sometimes business didn't only happen in conference rooms. He chose a quiet corner of the yard, took a glass of red wine in hand, and began to watch. That was Edmund's habit. Anywhere he went, he observed before he acted, and what he saw at this party irritated him from the very first moment. A young woman with chestnut-brown hair, neatly tied at the nape of her neck, was hurrying all over the yard. She carried trays of food, poured drinks for the guests, straightened the chairs, picked up trash that had fallen onto the grass. Her white apron was stained with frosting and sauce, yet she kept working without pause. Not a single guest said thank you. Edmund frowned. He looked more closely and realized she wasn't hired help. Around her neck was a delicate chain with a pendant of some kind he couldn't make out from that distance. And there was the way she looked at the little curly-haired girl running after her and tugging at her skirt with such tenderness. That was the look of a mother. So she was the hostess, the mother of the birthday child. An older woman with dyed blonde hair and tightly pressed lips came to stand beside her. Edmund caught fragments of the shrill voice. "Meredith, why did you let the food tray go empty like this? The guests are all starving already. Hurry up." The young woman named Meredith gave a small nod and quickly went back into the house. Not a word of protest, not the slightest trace of annoyance on her face. Edmund watched the older woman turn and begin speaking with a younger woman holding a phone. The two of them laughed together about something he couldn't hear. Then he saw Bradley Norton. Richard had introduced Bradley to him when they first arrived. A real estate broker with a smile that was a little too wide and a handshake that was a little too firm. The kind of man who liked to make an impression without having anything worth being impressed by. Bradley was standing beside another woman. Not Meredith. This one was taller, more heavily made up, dressed in a shorter dress. Bradley's hand rested with easy familiarity on the small of her back, in the kind of way no one put a hand on an ordinary colleague. Edmund glanced toward Meredith as she came out of the house carrying a tray of cupcakes. She saw Bradley and that other woman. Her eyes passed over them for only a fleeting second, before turning away. Not anger, not pain. Only the acceptance of someone who had grown used to it, a long time ago. Little Rosie ran over and tugged at her mother's skirt. "Mommy, I want cake." "In a little while, sweetheart. We'll cut the cake after the candles are blown out." Meredith bent down and smoothed her daughter's hair, a gentle smile on her lips. In that moment, Edmund saw something change in her face. The exhaustion vanished. All that remained was the pure love of a mother. Then everything happened very fast. Rosie blew out the candles. Everyone clapped. Bradley stepped forward, and in the space of a heartbeat, he grabbed his wife by the shoulders and shoved her face into the tower of cupcakes. Edmund went still. The wine glass in his hand tilted, nearly spilling. He set it down on the nearest table, his eyes never leaving, the woman rising to her feet with pink frosting covering her face. 47 people stood frozen like statues. No one did anything. No one said a word. Edmund waited. Waited for her to scream. Waited for her to cry. Waited for her to slap that wretched husband across the face. But she did none of those things. She wiped frosting from her cheek, lifted it to her daughter's lips as the little girl cried, and asked, "Is it sweet, baby?" In a voice so calm it was almost impossible to believe. Edmund felt a chill run down his spine. Not from fear, from something else. Something he couldn't name. She picked up her child and walked inside, her back straight, her head held high. Edmund turned to Marcus, his assistant, who had been standing silently beside him the whole time. "Who is she?" Marcus looked in the direction Meredith had disappeared. Bradley Norton's wife. Meredith. I heard she used to work as a restaurant server. Edmund didn't answer. He kept his gaze on the door that had just closed, the place where Meredith had vanished with her daughter. Why didn't she scream? Why didn't she cry? Why was her first reaction to feed her child frosting and walk away as though nothing had happened? He had met many kinds of people in his life. Weak ones who collapsed when hardship came. Strong ones who shouted to prove their strength. But he had never met anyone who reacted the way she did. That silence wasn't weakness. It was a kind of strength Edmund had never seen before. He turned to Marcus, his voice low and precise. "Find me everything on that woman. Her real name, her family, her past, everything. Before tomorrow morning." Marcus nodded without asking another question. After many years of working with Edmund, he knew when to stay silent and obey. Edmund looked back at the party, which had already continued as though nothing had happened. Bradley was laughing and joking with the other woman. Meredith's mother-in-law was ordering someone to cut the cake. Her sister-in-law had her face buried in her phone, probably posting the video to social media. They thought this was a funny joke. They didn't know that Edmund Cross never forgot, and he never let anything slide. The door had barely closed behind Meredith for even 10 seconds when the laughter began. Bradley Norton stood in the middle of the yard, one hand still smeared with pink frosting, the other draped over Tanya's shoulder, as if he had just finished telling the funniest joke in the world. He turned to look at the guests who were still standing frozen and gave a shrug. "She always likes to overreact. Don't mind her, everybody." Tanya let out a soft giggle and tipped her head against Bradley's shoulder. "I think she needs to learn how to have a sense of humor." Pamela Norton, Meredith's mother-in-law, stepped out into the yard with the expression of a woman whose daughter-in-law had merely spilled a glass of water rather than been humiliated in front of nearly 50 people. She clapped her hands twice, drawing the attention of the crowd. "Come on now, the party's still going. Who wants cake?" "Bradley, cut the cake. The part that didn't get touched can still be eaten." As if by some dark miracle, the party began to move again. Guests started talking. The music was turned up louder. Children began running around once more. And Meredith, the woman who had just had her face shoved into her own daughter's birthday cake, was forgotten as though she had never existed. Edmund stood in the corner of the yard, witnessing all of it with eyes as cold as ice. He watched Courtney, Bradley's sister, sitting on a plastic chair at the edge of the garden. She didn't even bother to hide what she was doing. Her finger moved across the phone screen. Her lips curved into a smug little smile. Edmund stood close enough to see that she had TikTok open. Courtney typed a caption, her lips moving faintly with each word she entered. Edmund didn't need to see the screen to guess what it said. He had met far too many people like her, the kind who fed on other people's misery, turning one person's pain into another person's entertainment. She pressed the post button and looked up, catching Edmund's gaze. She winked at him as if the two of them were sharing some amusing secret. Edmund gave nothing back. He simply memorized her face. Richard Holloway stepped over beside Edmund, holding a plate of cake. "You're not eating?" "It's good." Edmund looked at the slice of cake in Richard's hand. Pink frosting, the same kind of frosting that had covered Meredith's face only moments ago. He shook his head. "I'm not hungry." Richard gave a shrug, took a bite of cake, and spoke in an ordinary tone, as if they were discussing the weather. "Did you know this family before? You seem pretty focused on them." "No. Today's the first time." "Then why do you seem so interested?" "It's just a husband and wife thing. Bradley said his wife likes to make a scene, so I guess he got annoyed and taught her a lesson." Edmund turned and looked at Richard. His longtime business associate, a successful businessman, a father of 3 children, and he had just called humiliating a wife in front of dozens of people teaching her a lesson. "Do you have daughters, Richard?" Richard looked surprised by the sudden question. I do, too. Why? Edmund didn't answer directly. He looked toward the door Meredith had gone through, where the darkness of the house had swallowed her and her little girl whole. It's not a husband and wife thing. It's about a woman who was just humiliated in front of 47 people, and not one of them stood up for her, including the people who should have protected her most. Richard fell silent, not knowing what to say. Edmund set his untouched glass of wine down on the nearest table. I have to go. There's something I need to handle. But you just got here. It's still early. I've seen enough. Edmund walked toward the gate without looking back. He passed Bradley, laughing with Tanya. He passed Pamela, handing out cake to the guests. He passed Courtney, checking the view count on the video she had just posted. No one noticed him leaving. Just as no one had noticed Meredith when she disappeared. Marcus was already waiting outside beside the gleaming black car. He opened the door for Edmund without asking why his boss was leaving the party so early. Edmund slid into the back seat, and the car door shut, sealing out the music and laughter from the party completely. In the quiet stillness inside the car, Edmund closed his eyes for a single second. Meredith's image rose in his mind, pink frosting across her face, tears that never fell, and the question she had asked her daughter. Is it sweet, baby? He opened his eyes, took out his phone, and called a familiar number. I need an investigation. The subject's name is Meredith, wife of Bradley Norton, living in the suburbs of Chicago. I want to know everything about her. Her real name, her family, her past, her history before she came to Chicago. Anything that can be found. Don't miss a thing. The voice on the other end was brief. Understood. When do you need it? Before tomorrow morning. Edmund ended the call and looked out through the window. Streetlights slid past like blurred ribbons of pale light in the night. He didn't know why he cared so much about a woman he didn't know. He met hundreds of people every month, witnessed every kind of tragedy and farce life had to offer. But there was something about Meredith that he couldn't forget. Maybe it was the way she looked at her daughter. Maybe it was the way she stood back up with her dignity untouched, even after being dragged through the mud. Maybe it was the silence that felt more frightening than any scream. Or maybe, deep in the hidden places of his mind, Edmund saw something in her that he had once seen in another woman, a very long time ago. The car moved through the night, carrying a man and the questions that had no answers. At least not yet. That night, the house finally sank into silence. The guests had gone home long ago, taking with them their laughter and their idle stories about Bradley Norton's wife who always made too much of everything. Dirty dishes were piled high in the sink. Deflated balloons lay scattered across the floor. And Bradley had disappeared somewhere, maybe with Tanya, maybe to some bar. Meredith didn't know and no longer wanted to know. She had already soothed Rosie to sleep. The little girl had cried so much after the party, asking over and over why Daddy had made Mommy's face all messy. Meredith hadn't known how to answer. She had only held her child close, singing lullabies in a voice gone rough and thin, until those tiny eyes finally drifted shut and that little hand loosened around the worn brown teddy bear she always clutched. Now Meredith sat alone in the cramped bathroom. The door was locked. A weak yellow light fell across her face like a kind of sorrowful glow. In the mirror, Meredith saw a woman of 28, who looked older than her years, dark shadows beneath her eyes, shoulders drawn inward, and at the edge of her hairline, there was still a little pink frosting she had missed when she wiped herself off so hurriedly before. She dipped the cloth into warm water, wrung it out, then slowly wiped away the last streak of frosting, bit by bit, gently, as if she were wiping away 4 years of marriage, 4 years of endurance, 4 years of telling herself that things would get better, that Bradley would change, that she simply needed to try harder. The cloth fell into the sink. Meredith stared into the mirror, staring for a long time into her own eyes. She no longer recognized that woman. Her hand rose unconsciously to her chest, touching the delicate chain hidden beneath her blouse. She pulled it out, revealing a small silver ring with an exquisitely carved orchid etched into it. The ring was old, the silver darkened by time, but Meredith had never once taken it off. She closed her hand tightly around the ring, feeling its familiar shape press into her skin. "Mom," she whispered into the empty air. "What am I supposed to do?" No one answered. There was only the sound of water dripping from the faucet and the whistle of the night wind slipping through the crack in the window. Meredith leaned her back against the freezing wall and slowly slid down until she was sitting on the floor. The cold tile cut through the thin fabric of her clothes, but she didn't care. And then, for the first time since the party, she cried. Not loud tears, no sobbing, no wailing, just silent drops slipping down her cheeks, falling onto her hands, falling onto the orchid ring she held so tightly. She cried for 4 years of being diminished inside her own home. She cried for the nights she had waited for her husband to come home with no hope left in her heart. She cried for the little daughter who had been forced to witness her mother being treated that way. She cried for the young woman she had once been, the one who had believed in love and promises. But she didn't cry for long. Meredith drew in a deep breath and wiped her tears away with the back of her hand. She opened her palm and looked at the orchid ring lying there, glinting beneath the yellow light. Her mother's ring. She remembered her mother's gentle voice, remembered the sunlit room in Vermont, remembered the life she had before she ever met Bradley Norton, a life that no one at that party today could ever have imagined, a life she had willingly left behind in search of the simplest thing in the world, real love. To understand who Meredith truly was, it is necessary to turn back time, not to Chicago, not to the cramped rental house with the leaking sink, but to Vermont, where a little girl once ran through fields that stretched all the way to the horizon. Meredith Ashford grew up on an estate larger than some public parks. Wrought iron gates opened onto a white gravel drive, lined on both sides with ancient oak trees that had stood there since before her father was born. The main house had 14 bedrooms, a private library filled with thousands of books, and a garden so vast that the groundskeeper needed an entire day just to walk its length. But the Ashford family did not live the way people imagined the rich lived. Pierce Ashford, Meredith's father, was one of the most powerful businessmen in America. He owned Ashford Holdings, a corporation whose reach stretched from real estate to finance, from Las Vegas to Monaco. But no one looking at him would have guessed it. He drove a 15-year-old pickup truck. He wore simple shirts and khaki trousers. Every morning he sat drinking tea with the gardener and called the staff by name, asking about their families as though they were friends rather than employees. He taught Meredith that money did not define a person. The way you treated other people was the true measure of your worth. Her mother, Eleanor, was the gentlest woman Meredith had ever known. She had the same glossy brown hair Meredith had now, and eyes that always seemed lit from within by warmth. She never needed to raise her voice to be heard. She only had to step into a room, and people would turn toward her without thinking. But when Meredith was 19, cancer took her away. In her final days, Eleanor lay in the bedroom where she had slept for 30 years. She didn't want to go to a hospital. She wanted to see the sunlight filtering through the white curtains, hear the birds singing beyond the window, and hold her daughter's hand. On that day, she slipped the silver ring from her finger. It was an orchid ring, one she had worn since she was a young woman. She placed it in Meredith's palm. "My daughter," she said, her voice frail but still full of love. "Do you know why I love orchids? Because an orchid doesn't need to cry out to be noticed. It simply blooms in silence, and the whole world finds its way to admire it. You are my orchid, Meredith. Don't ever forget that." Meredith closed her hand tightly around the ring, tears streaming down her face. "I promise, Mom." After her mother died, Meredith changed. She no longer wanted to live inside the bubble of wealth. She looked around and saw that everyone who came near her wanted something. Her college friends wanted invitations to the estate. Every man who pursued her knew who she was before he even knew her name. She wanted to find something money couldn't buy, someone who would love her for who she truly was, not for the Ashford name, and so she made the wildest decision of her life. She took her mother's surname, Bellamy. She left Vermont. She moved to Chicago with 1 suitcase of clothes and a small amount of savings. She started over from nothing, working as a server in a small cafe. Pierce Ashford objected fiercely. He couldn't understand why his daughter would want to walk away from everything, but in the end, he respected her decision, because that was how he had raised her, to choose freely, to bear responsibility for her own choices. On the day Meredith left, Pierce stood at the gates of the estate and watched the taxi until it disappeared beyond the bend in the road. He spoke only 1 sentence before she got into the car. "Whenever you need me, I'm still here." 5 years ago, Chicago was a strange city to Meredith. She rented a tiny studio apartment in the suburbs, where the sound of the train rolled past every night, and the smell of food from the Chinese restaurant downstairs drifted upward without pause. She found work as a barista in a small cafe near downtown, where most of the customers were hurried office workers and sleep-deprived students. For the first time in her life, Meredith had to manage everything on her own. Pay her own rent, cook her own meals, wash her own clothes. And she felt a strange kind of happiness in it. Bradley Norton walked into that cafe on an autumn morning. He was tall, dressed in a gray suit, his hair neatly slicked back, his smile broad and confident as though the whole world already belonged to him. He ordered a double espresso and looked at Meredith with curious eyes. "Are you new here? I come here every day and I've never seen you before." Meredith gave him a polite smile. "I've only been here for 2 weeks." He held out his hand. "Bradley Norton, real estate broker. I sell houses to rich people." Meredith shook his hand without looking impressed. "Meredith Bellamy. I make coffee for sleepy people." Bradley laughed out loud, and from that day on, he came to the cafe every morning. He flirted. Meredith turned him down. He persisted. Meredith still kept her distance. But Bradley had one thing the men before him had never had. He didn't know who she was. He didn't know about Ashford Holdings, about the estate in Vermont, about the billions of dollars. To him, she was only a girl making coffee, a girl with sad eyes and a gentle smile. And that was exactly what Meredith had been looking for. After 3 months, she agreed to have dinner with him. After 6 months, they were officially dating. After 8 months, Bradley knelt down and proposed in the little park near her apartment. With a modest ring, he told her he had saved 3 months of salary to buy. Meredith cried and nodded yes. She thought she had found real love, a man who loved her for herself, not for money. She was wrong. After the wedding, everything changed so quickly that Meredith didn't even realize it at first. Bradley no longer opened the car door for her. No more surprise flowers. No more sweet messages in the middle of the day. He started coming home late, started snapping over little things, started looking at her with the dull indifference of someone staring at a piece of furniture that had grown old. Pamela, her mother-in-law, had been a nightmare from the very first day. She looked at Meredith as if her daughter-in-law were something stuck to the bottom of her shoe. She ordered her around to do every kind of housework, criticized her cooking, said she didn't clean properly, even found fault with the way she dressed. Courtney, Bradley's sister, wasn't any better. She looked at Meredith with open contempt, whispering to her mother every time Meredith passed by. Then Rosie was born, and Meredith thought things would get better. But they didn't. The scent of unfamiliar perfume began appearing on her husband's clothes. Midnight phone calls that made Bradley step out into the hallway to answer them. Nights when he came home late, with excuses about meetings, clients, contracts. Meredith wasn't foolish. She knew there was another woman. But she stayed silent, because Rosie was still too little, because she hoped he would come to his senses, because she wanted to believe that the love they had at the beginning was still somewhere there, only waiting to be found again. 4 years passed. Bradley didn't change. He only became worse. And today, at their daughter's 4th birthday party, when cake frosting covered her face and not one of the 47 guests stood up for her, Meredith realized something. It was time to stop. Not because she couldn't endure anymore, but because her daughter deserved to grow up without having to watch her mother be treated that way. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the reinforced glass walls of Edmund Cross's office on the 32nd floor of the tallest building in downtown Chicago. Edmund had been awake since 5 o'clock, not because of work, but because the image of the woman with pink frosting on her face had haunted his mind all through the night. Marcus knocked on the door at 7, a thin file in his hand. "This is the information on that woman, sir." Edmund gave a nod, signaling for Marcus to place the file on the desk. He opened it and began to read. Name, Meredith Bellamy. Age, 28. Occupation, server at Olive Garden, previously a barista at a small cafe. Assets, none. Car, none. Real estate, none. Family, no information. Edmund frowned and read that last line again. No family? No past before 5 years ago? Marcus shook his head. It's as if she appeared out of nowhere, sir. There are no records of her before she came to Chicago. No publicly available birth certificate. No school records. No information at all about parents or relatives. Then where did she come from? Unclear. Her first registered address was a studio apartment in the suburbs of Chicago, about 5 years ago. Before that, there's nothing. Edmund leaned back in his chair, staring at the thin file. None of this made sense. Everyone had a past. Everyone left traces, unless they had erased them on purpose. Dig deeper, he ordered. Something's wrong here. Marcus nodded. and left the room. Edmund turned toward his computer screen, intending to check his work emails. But instead, his hand typed 3 words into the search bar: cake face wife. The results appeared immediately. Courtney Norton's video had gone viral on TikTok overnight. More than 2 million views, tens of thousands of shares. The hashtags cakefacewife and drama queen were trending across multiple platforms. Edmund clicked on the video and watched the scene from the night before. Bradley shoved his wife's face into the cake. Meredith stood back up. Pink frosting covered her face. She fed a little frosting to her daughter, then lifted the child and walked away. The comments below were full of ridicule. Poor thing. She must be such a terrible cook if her husband had to punish her. She wanted drama, so she got drama. A woman who can't keep her husband deserves it. Edmund felt anger begin to boil in his chest. Not for himself, but for the woman in the video, the one being judged by millions of strangers who knew nothing of the truth. He watched the video again, this time more slowly, and he zoomed in. In the moment, Meredith rose to her feet. Before she wiped frosting onto her child's lips, something glinted at her chest. A delicate chain with some kind of pendant. Edmund zoomed in further. The image was slightly blurred, but he could still make it out. A silver ring. An orchid. Edmund went still. His memory moved backward 5 years. Pierce Ashford's office in Vermont. Edmund had gone there to sign an important partnership agreement. While waiting for Pierce, he had sat in the man's study and noticed a photograph on the desk. It showed a young woman, around 22 or 23, standing in a garden full of flowers. The girl had chestnut brown hair and a gentle smile, and on her chest was a chain holding a silver orchid ring. Pierce had introduced her as his daughter, Meredith, the one who had left home to live her own life and didn't want anyone to know about her family. Edmund looked back at the computer screen, looked at the face of the woman in the video. The same hair, the same eyes, the same orchid ring. It couldn't be. He picked up his phone and dialed a familiar number, one he had saved 5 years ago but had never once called. Pierce Ashford's number. The phone rang 3 times before someone answered. Pierce Ashford speaking. The voice on the other end was still as deep, warm, and commanding as Edmund remembered from 5 years earlier. The voice of a man accustomed to giving orders, accustomed to being heard, accustomed to holding power in his hands. Pierce, this is Edmund Cross. There was a brief silence, then Pierce's tone softened. Edmund, it's been a long time. What's happened that has you calling me this early in the morning? Edmund didn't circle around the point. He never did. I have a question. Your wife's orchid ring, the silver one she used to wear, did you give it to your daughter? A long silence followed. Edmund could hear Pierce breathing on the other end of the line, heavier now, slower now, as if that question had struck an old wound. Why are you asking about that ring? Because I just saw it, around the neck of a woman in Chicago. She was humiliated by her husband in front of nearly 50 people at a birthday party. The video is spreading all over social media with millions of views. Silence again, this time longer. And when Pierce finally spoke, his voice had changed. For the first time in his life, Edmund heard a tremor in the voice of the most powerful man he had ever known. My girl, Meredith, is she all right? She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She fed her daughter a little frosting from her own cheek, then carried her inside. Not a word. Pierce let out a long breath, heavy with something close to sorrow. That's my daughter. She's like her mother in every detail. Edmund looked out the window. The city of Chicago stretched beneath him like a miniature map. Why is she living like this, Pierce? She's the heir to Ashford Holdings. She could have anything in this world. Because she didn't want everything. She only wanted the one thing money can't buy. Pierce paused, and his voice dropped lower. She wanted to find someone who loved her for who she was, not for the Ashford name or my fortune. She said that if she lived under her real name, she would never know who truly loved her. So you knew where she was living? Knew she got married? Knew how she was being treated? I had people watching from a distance, making sure she was safe, but I didn't interfere. Edmund frowned. Why not? Because she wouldn't allow it. She said if I interfered, she would never know what real love was. She needed to go through it herself to understand. Pierce's voice caught in his throat. I respected that decision, even though it has torn my heart apart every single day. Edmund said nothing, letting Pierce's words settle into the silence. He understood. He understood why a man with Pierce's power would stand by and watch his daughter suffer. It wasn't indifference. It was respect. The most painful kind, and perhaps the purest. "Now she knows," Edmund said, his voice cold and certain. 4 years is long enough to know whether a man truly loves you. And that husband of hers has already given her the answer. Pierce said nothing. Edmund continued, "I'm going to handle this." "Edmund." Pierce's voice had gone rough. "Thank you. But why do you care? You don't owe me anything, and you don't know Meredith." Edmund looked at the computer screen, where the video was still playing. Meredith rising to her feet with her dignity untouched, feeding frosting to her child, then walking away. "Because I was there last night. I watched her be humiliated in front of nearly 50 people, and not one of them stood up for her. Not even me." He paused. "I don't like that feeling, and I don't intend to let it happen again." Pierce was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke, slowly and carefully. "Do whatever you have to do, Edmund. I trust you. But don't let Meredith know I'm involved. She won't accept that. I understand." Edmund ended the call. He set the phone down on the desk and turned to look out the window. Chicago moved below him in all its restless motion. Millions of people living their ordinary lives, unaware that a storm was about to fall upon one small family in the suburbs. Marcus knocked and stepped into the office. Edmund didn't turn around. He only spoke, his voice cold as steel. "Find out everything about Bradley Norton. His work, his finances, his relationships, any dirty dealings if there are any. Everything. I want to know what he's most afraid of losing." Marcus gave a nod. "Understood, sir. When do you need it?" Edmund turned then, his gray eyes cold as ice. "As soon as possible." Edmund Cross wasn't the kind of man who acted in haste. He had built his business empire through patience, through the ability to wait for the right moment, through understanding that the finest moves were often the ones calculated with the greatest care. And now, with Bradley Norton, he intended to apply that exact strategy. During the first week after his call with Pierce, Edmund did nothing at all. He simply watched. Marcus reported to him every day. Meredith still went to work at the restaurant from morning until night. She still picked Rosie up from daycare at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. She still cooked dinner, bathed her daughter, read stories, and lulled her to sleep. She still lived as if nothing had happened. But Edmund saw what other people didn't. He saw that the light had gone out of her eyes. He saw that the smile she gave her daughter, though still gentle, now carried something broken deep inside it. He saw the way she stared into empty space whenever she thought no one was paying attention, as if she were trying to find a way out of a maze, with no exit. The video on TikTok kept spreading. The comments grew crueler by the day. Some people even found out where Meredith worked and left 1-star reviews on Google filled with mockery. She had to ask to be moved to the night shift to avoid the curious stares of customers. But she didn't grow bitter. She didn't demand revenge. She simply endured in silence and kept living. Edmund stood in his office, looking down over the city, a cup of coffee in his hand that had gone cold long ago. Marcus stood behind him, waiting. "She could call her father at any moment," Edmund said, his voice thoughtful. "One phone call and everything would change. But she doesn't do it." "Maybe she has too much pride," Marcus replied. "It's not pride. It's faith." Edmund turned and looked at his assistant. "She still believes she has to solve her own problems. She still believes she doesn't need anyone's help. Then why should we do anything? If she doesn't want help?" Edmund set the coffee cup down on the desk. "Because she deserves better than what she's being given. And because the people who hurt her need to learn that actions have consequences." Marcus nodded and asked nothing more. The plan began in the second week. Edmund didn't do anything with his own hands. He didn't need to. All he had to do was whisper the right information into the right ears. One evening, at a cocktail party for Chicago's high-end real estate circle, a man no one knew casually mentioned Bradley Norton's name in conversation as though it meant nothing. "I heard he's under investigation for suspected contract fraud. Some major clients are complaining that they were deceived in their deals." The man who heard it carried the story to someone else. That person repeated it to another. And so the rumor spread like fire through a dry field. There was no evidence, no real investigation, only whispers in the dark. But in the business world, rumors were sometimes more dangerous than truth itself. Clients began keeping their distance from Bradley. People who had once wanted to buy and sell property through him suddenly changed their minds and moved to other brokers without explanation. Bradley's phone, which had once rung without stopping, now stayed silent all day long. Bradley couldn't understand what was happening. He called old clients. They didn't pick up. He sent emails. No one replied. He attended networking events the way he always had. People looked at him differently now, then found excuses to walk away. 2 weeks passed. Bradley's sales dropped to 0. His boss called him into the office on a Friday afternoon. The air conditioning was running hard, but Bradley could still feel sweat sliding down his back. "Bradley, it's been a month, and you haven't closed a single deal. The company can't keep paying someone who brings in no revenue." Bradley opened his mouth to explain, to say it wasn't his fault, to say someone had to be sabotaging him, but his boss had already placed a stack of papers in front of him. "This is your termination notice. You have until the end of the day to clear out your personal things." 30 minutes later, Bradley Norton stepped out of the office building where he had worked for 6 years. In his arms was a cardboard box holding a few small belongings: a picture frame, a tiny cactus, a mug that said "Best Broker." He stood on the sidewalk, staring up at the skyscraper with a dazed expression in his eyes. He didn't understand what was happening. He didn't know that this was only the beginning. The first person Bradley called after being fired wasn't his wife. It wasn't his mother. It was Tanya. He sat in his car, the cardboard box holding his personal belongings resting on the passenger seat, his trembling hand dialing a number he knew by heart. Tanya answered on the 4th ring. "Is that you? I'm busy." Her voice was colder than usual. Or maybe it had always been that cold, and Bradley had simply never noticed. "Baby, I just lost my job." Bradley swallowed hard, trying to keep his voice steady. "The company fired me. I don't know what to do." Silence came from the other end of the line, longer than usual, long enough that Bradley had to glance at the screen to make sure the call hadn't been dropped. "You lost your job?" Tanya finally said, but there was no worry in her voice, no sympathy. It was a question. A cold, calculating question. "So, what are you planning to do next?" "I'll find a new job. I have experience. I have connections in the industry. I'll be back on my feet in a few months." "A few months?" Tanya repeated, with something in her tone that sounded dangerously close to contempt. "Are you saying a few months without any income?" Bradley began to feel that something was wrong. "Tanya, I know this is hard, but we'll get through it. Just wait for me a little while." "A little while is how long, Bradley? 1 month? 2 months? Half a year?" Tanya let out a sigh full of irritation. "Bradley, I think we should take a break for a while." Bradley went still. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. "What did you say?" "I need time to think. About us. About the future." Her voice had completely lost the sweetness she always used whenever they were together. "I'll reach out later." "Tanya, wait." The line went dead. Bradley stared at the phone screen for several seconds, unable to believe what had just happened. He called again. The phone rang and rang, but no one answered. He called once more. This time, an automated voice came on. "The number you have dialed is currently unavailable." He tried sending a message. It showed 1 gray check mark and never turned blue. Tanya Wells had blocked his number. The woman he had neglected his wife to pursue, the woman he had brought to his daughter's birthday party as a declaration of possession, the woman he had believed would stay by his side forever, had vanished from his life faster than he had ever pushed his wife away. Bradley didn't know that Tanya's story still had another chapter. At the very moment she blocked Bradley's number, her phone vibrated with a text from an unfamiliar number. "Hello, Tanya. I'm a friend of a friend. I've heard you're a smart and beautiful woman. I'm a businessman in the tech industry, and I'm currently looking for a companion. If you're interested, let me know. Here's my Instagram link." Tanya tapped the link. An Instagram account with hundreds of thousands of followers appeared on her screen. Photos of a handsome middle-aged man standing beside luxury cars, on yachts, at lavish parties. Hashtags about tech investing, startups, and the high life. Tanya's eyes lit up. She texted back immediately. They began talking. He introduced himself as Nathaniel, an angel investor looking for opportunities in Chicago. He promised to take her to dinner at the most expensive restaurants in the city. Tanya thought she had just hit the jackpot. Bradley had just lost his job, and she had found an even bigger fish. They arranged their first meeting at a 5-star restaurant. Nathaniel appeared exactly as he had described himself, polished and generous. He ordered the most expensive bottle of wine on the menu, talked about multi-million-dollar investment projects, and looked at Tanya as if she were the most precious diamond in the room. The second date, the third date. Tanya had already begun imagining her new life. Designer handbags, luxury cars, a penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan. Then came the fourth date, and Nathaniel never showed up. Tanya called. The number was unavailable. She checked his Instagram. The account had vanished. She searched his name on Google. There were no results at all. Nathaniel, the angel investor with hundreds of thousands of followers on social media, didn't exist. Tanya sat alone in her rented apartment, staring at her phone with empty eyes. She had just left Bradley. And Nathaniel had just left her. She didn't know that Nathaniel was nothing but a puppet, a fake profile created by one of Edmund Cross's assistants. Its only purpose had been to let Tanya taste betrayal, just as she had helped Bradley betray his wife. Two deceivers had been deceiving each other all along. Bradley deceived Meredith into believing he loved her while he was with Tanya. Tanya deceived Bradley into believing she loved him while all she truly loved was his money. And now both of them were realizing they had nothing left. Bradley had lost his job, lost his mistress, and was about to lose his home as well. Tanya had lost Bradley, lost her fake wealthy man, and ended up with empty hands, just as she had been before she ever met him. Karma didn't need anyone to strike. It only needed the right moment and a gentle push in exactly the right place. Everything collapsed faster than Bradley had imagined. No job meant no income. No income meant no money to pay the rent. The landlord, a middle-aged man with cold eyes and a flat, even voice, knocked on the door one morning with a notice in his hand. "You have 30 days to move out. That's all I can give you." Bradley wanted to argue, wanted to explain, wanted to beg for more time. But when he looked into the landlord's eyes, he knew there was nothing to say. He was already 2 months behind on the rent. This was the final extension. Pamela, his mother, couldn't help at all. She lived on a meager pension, and the support Bradley himself had once given her. Courtney was drowning in credit card debt. And his friends? The people he had called friends had been avoiding him like a disease ever since the rumors of fraud began to spread. Meredith had moved out the week before, taking Rosie with her to stay somewhere temporary that Bradley didn't know. She left no address, no message, only divorce papers on the kitchen table. Bradley didn't sign them. He couldn't sign them. Not because he still loved Meredith, but because signing them would mean admitting complete defeat. On the last night before he had to leave the house, Bradley sat in his old car parked on an empty lot near the harbor. This car was the only thing left that still belonged to him. And even that was about to be repossessed by the bank because he had missed 3 monthly payments. He stared into the thick darkness beyond the windshield. The city lights glittered far away, like promises of a luxurious life he had once believed he deserved. Now he had nothing. No job, no lover, no home, no money, no future. He didn't even have enough cash left for a decent meal. Headlights swept across the windows, pulling Bradley from his grim thoughts. A gleaming black car came to a stop a few yards away from his own, the kind of car Bradley had once sold to his wealthiest clients, the kind he had once dreamed of owning one day. The door opened. A man stepped out, tall, dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit, short dark hair, neatly kept, and gray eyes, cold as steel, catching the streetlight with an icy gleam. Bradley recognized the man. He had seen that face somewhere before, but he couldn't place it. The man walked to Bradley's car, opened the passenger door, and sat down as though it were his own vehicle. Bradley jolted backward, his spine striking the driver's side door. "Who are you? What do you want?" The man didn't answer at once. He stared straight ahead, as though weighing something in his mind. Then he reached into his suit jacket, took out a photograph, and laid it gently on the dashboard. Bradley looked down. His heart seemed to seize in his chest. The photograph was of Rosie, his daughter, her little face blurred with tears, her wide eyes filled with fear and hurt. The picture had been taken at the birthday party, in the very moment Bradley was humiliating her mother. "Do you know who I am?" The man's voice was low and cold, like the sound of a blade slicing through ice. Bradley shook his head, his eyes still fixed on the photograph. "I'm the man who stood in the corner of the yard on your daughter's birthday. I watched how you treated your wife in front of nearly 50 people." The memory rushed back. The party. The stranger standing off to one side, holding a glass of wine, watching. Bradley hadn't paid attention to him then. He had been just one of many unfamiliar faces Richard had invited. "My marriage is none of your business." Bradley tried to recover his confidence, but his voice trembled. "You've got no right to interfere." Edmund turned and looked at him. The gray eyes held not a trace of emotion, as though he were looking at an insect too insignificant to matter. "You lost your job because of rumors of fraud. You lost Tanya because she went chasing after a richer man. You lost your house because you couldn't pay the rent. Have you ever wondered why all of that happened at the same time?" Bradley fell silent. For the first time, he began to understand that something was wrong. Not bad luck, not misfortune, but an invisible hand arranging everything. "What did you do?" Bradley's voice turned hoarse. "Who are you to do this to me?" Edmund looked at him for a long moment, then slowly shook his head. "I didn't do anything. I only let your life collapse on its own." He paused, letting the words settle, because it was built on sand, on lies, on contempt for other people, on the belief that you could mistreat your wife and child without consequences. Edmund opened the car door and stepped out. Before shutting it, he turned back and looked at Bradley one last time. "And this is only the beginning." The door closed. The black car glided away into the night, leaving Bradley alone in the dark. He looked down at the photograph of Rosie, still lying on the dashboard. His daughter's tear-soaked face looked back at him like an accusation that didn't need words. For the first time in his life, Bradley Norton felt real fear. Not fear of the man who had just driven away, but fear of himself. Fear of what he had done. Fear of what he had become. And fear that perhaps, just perhaps, he deserved every bit of this. The little rental house in the suburbs of Chicago was quieter now than it had ever been before. No more doors slamming at midnight when Bradley came home late. No more arguments from Pamela and Courtney whenever they came to visit. No more unfamiliar perfume lingering on some shirt tossed carelessly into the laundry basket. There was only Meredith and Rosie. Meredith had packed Bradley's things into cardboard boxes and left them on the porch the week before. He came to collect them while she was at work and didn't leave a single note behind. She knew because when she came home, the boxes were gone, and the spare key he had kept was resting on the front step. That was how Bradley Norton said goodbye to 4 years of marriage. Not one word, not one look, only silence. Meredith wasn't sad. She only felt relieved. But Rosie was different. That evening, after they finished a simple dinner of spaghetti and meatballs, Rosie sat on the old rug in the living room, playing with the blonde-haired doll she loved most. Meredith sat on the sofa, going through the pile of bills and papers that still needed attention. Rosie fed the doll with a tiny plastic spoon, murmuring little stories only she could understand. Then suddenly, she stopped. "Mommy." "Yes? Sweetheart?" Rosie didn't look up. She was still holding the doll in her hands, but her fingers had stopped moving. "Why doesn't Daddy come home anymore?" Meredith set the stack of papers down. She had known this question would come. She had prepared herself for it. But when it finally left the lips of her 4-year-old daughter, she still felt her heart tighten inside her chest. She moved to her daughter, knelt down so their eyes were level, and said softly, "Sweetheart, Daddy and Mommy are going to live in 2 different houses from now on." Rosie tilted her head, her wide eyes fixed on her mother in confusion. "Like Tommy's house at school, Mommy?" "Tommy has 2 houses too. Tommy says he stays with his mommy 1 week and his daddy 1 week. Meredith swallowed hard. "Yes, like that." Rosie was quiet for a moment, as if she were thinking about something very important. Then she looked up, her voice so small it was almost a whisper. "Is it because cake got all over your face, Mommy?" Meredith froze. She hadn't thought Rosie would remember. Rosie was only 4. Children that age usually forgot things very quickly. But clearly, her daughter hadn't forgotten. She remembered everything. She remembered what had happened at the birthday party. She remembered seeing her mother humiliated in front of dozens of people. Rosie saw what Daddy did. Her little voice trembled, and her eyes began to fill with tears. Daddy pushed Mommy into the cake. Rosie was really scared. Rosie cried, and nobody helped Mommy. Meredith's tears spilled over before she could stop them. She pulled her daughter tightly into her arms, feeling the little body trembling against her. She had tried to be strong in front of everyone. In front of Bradley. In front of Pamela. In front of the 47 guests at the party. But here, in front of her daughter, in this small living room, she couldn't pretend anymore. Rosie wrapped her arms around her mother's neck, as if she were trying to protect her in the only way a 4-year-old child knew how. Rosie doesn't like Daddy anymore. Daddy made Mommy sad. Meredith drew in a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She didn't want her daughter to grow up with hatred in her heart. No matter what Bradley had done to her, he was still Rosie's father, and she didn't want her child carrying that burden. Sweetheart, you don't have to dislike anyone. She wiped away her tears and looked into her daughter's eyes. You only need to know one thing. What thing? Meredith gently touched her daughter's cheek, brushing away the tears rolling down it. Mommy loves you, more than anything in the world, more than everything, and Mommy will always protect you, no matter what happens. Rosie looked at her, her eyes still wet but now holding something brighter inside them. Trust, comfort, safety. The kind only a mother's arms could give. Rosie loves Mommy the most too. Her voice still caught a little with tears. Rosie will protect Mommy too. When Rosie gets big, Rosie won't let anybody make Mommy sad anymore. Meredith smiled through her tears. Her 4-year-old daughter had just made her a promise. The promise of a child, innocent and pure, yet so sincere that it melted Meredith's heart. She held her daughter even tighter, and breathed in the familiar sweet scent of children's shampoo. For 4 years, she had endured for her child, because she wanted her daughter to have a whole family, because she was afraid her daughter would lose something if her parents divorced. But now she understood that what her daughter needed wasn't a whole family. What she needed was a happy mother, a mother who wasn't broken, a mother who could stand tall and tell her that everything was going to be all right. And Meredith would become that mother, for her daughter, and for herself. 3 days after that conversation with Rosie, Meredith found an envelope in the mailbox with no sender's name on it. Inside was an ivory business card, embossed in elegant black lettering. Victoria Chen, divorce and family attorney, senior partner at Chen & Associates. On the back of the card was a short handwritten note. Call me. All expenses have been paid. Meredith looked at the words and frowned. She didn't know anyone named Victoria Chen. She also didn't know who might have sent her the card of one of the most expensive divorce attorneys in Chicago. But she needed help, and if someone was willing to help, she wasn't going to turn it away. She called and made an appointment. Victoria Chen's office was on the 20th floor of a skyscraper downtown. Meredith walked in holding Rosie's hand, because daycare was closed that day and she had no one to ask to watch her daughter. A young and beautiful receptionist welcomed them with a smile and led them into a luxurious waiting room with leather sofas and a coffee table covered in fashion magazines. Rosie sat down in the corner of the room and took out the box of crayons and sketch pad Meredith had packed for her. Sit here and draw nicely, sweetheart. Mommy's going to talk to the lawyer and then I'll come right back. Yes, Mommy. Victoria Chen was a woman of about 50, with neatly cut black hair and sharp eyes behind silver-framed glasses. She stood and shook Meredith's hand when Meredith entered the office. Miss Bellamy, it's very nice to meet you. Please, have a seat. Meredith sat down in the chair across from her, back straight, hands resting in her lap. Miss Chen, I don't know who sent me your card, and I don't know who paid for this consultation. Victoria gave her a mysterious smile. There are people who want to help without needing to be thanked, Miss Bellamy. What matters is whether or not you want to accept that help. Meredith was silent for a moment, then nodded. I want a divorce. I was informed. Victoria opened a thick folder. And I've already prepared the initial paperwork. What do you want to claim from your husband? The house? The car? Monthly support? Meredith shook her head. I don't want property. The rental house is in his name. The car is too. I don't need those things. Victoria looked surprised. Then what do you want? Meredith opened her worn old handbag and pulled out a small notebook with frayed corners. She placed it on the desk. I want him to repay exactly what I've spent on this family over the past 4 years. Victoria looked at the notebook, then looked at Meredith. You kept detailed records? Meredith opened the notebook and began to read. Monthly rent, which he said he would pay, but I had to cover because he was always short on money. Electricity, water, gas, internet, daily living expenses. I paid all of it. The money for the car he's driving now, I paid it from my savings because he said he needed a car to go to work and support the family. Our daughter's school fees, doctor visits, milk, diapers, clothes for Rosie, I paid for all of it. Everything. Victoria wrote quickly. What's the total? Meredith turned to the final page of the notebook, where she had carefully calculated every expense. $87,342. Victoria stopped writing and looked up, her surprise impossible to hide. You spent that much while working as a restaurant server? Meredith didn't answer that question. She only said, if he can't afford to repay it, I have another offer. What offer? He gives up visitation rights permanently. In exchange, the debt is erased. Victoria studied Meredith for a long moment, as if reassessing the woman seated in front of her. This wasn't a weak victim begging for help. This was a mother with a clear plan and a will that couldn't be shaken. I understand. I'll send the offer to his attorney. A week later, Victoria called Meredith. He signed, Miss Bellamy. No questions, no negotiation, no request to see his daughter one last time. He signed the moment he received the papers. Meredith held the phone and stared out the window of her small apartment. She wasn't surprised. She had known Bradley would choose this. $87,000 mattered more to him than the 4-year-old daughter he had helped bring into the world. He gave up the right to be a father as easily as if he were giving up some old possession he no longer needed. Thank you, Victoria. I'll come sign the paperwork this week. She ended the call and set the phone down. Rosie came running from the bedroom, a drawing clutched in her hand. Mommy, I'm done drawing. Look. Meredith knelt and took the picture from her daughter. It was drawn in crayon, uneven and innocent in the way only a 4-year-old child could make it. There was a little house with a red roof, a yellow sun in the upper corner. 2 people standing in front of the house, holding hands. One grown up with long brown hair. One little girl with 2 pigtails. There was no third person. Who is this, sweetheart? Meredith asked, though she already knew the answer. Rosie pointed to each figure in the drawing, her voice bright and happy. This is Mommy. This is Rosie. This is our house. Anyone else? Rosie tilted her head, thinking for a moment. Then she shook her head and smiled. Mommy and Rosie. That's enough, Mommy. Meredith looked at the drawing, looked at the radiant smile on her daughter's face, and tears slipped quietly down her cheeks. She pulled Rosie into her arms and kissed the top of her head. Enough. Just the 2 of them. That was enough. A week after all the divorce papers were finalized, Meredith began to breathe a little easier. She had found a small apartment near her job, cheaper than the old house and closer to Rosie's daycare. They didn't have much, only a few cardboard boxes filled with clothes and Rosie's toys. But it was enough to begin again. That afternoon, after picking Rosie up from daycare, Meredith took her to a little cafe a few blocks from the new apartment. It had become a new ritual for the 2 of them. A strawberry milk for Rosie, a black coffee for Meredith, and 1 slice of chocolate cake to share. Rosie sat on a high stool, her legs swinging, chewing her cake and watching people pass by through the front window. Meredith sat across from her, holding her coffee, and for the first time in many months, she felt peace. The bell above the door gave a light chime. Meredith didn't pay attention. Customers came in and out of this place all day long, but then a shadow stopped beside her table. Excuse me, I'm sitting here. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. Meredith looked up. The man had already taken the chair across from her before she could answer. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up. No suit this time, yet still carrying that unmistakable air of power. His dark hair was short and neat, and his gray eyes, cold as steel, were fixed directly on her. Meredith noticed the faint scar running from his temple down toward his right ear. An old scar, long-healed, but still clear enough to see. She didn't know this man. She was certain she had never met him before. Who are you? Before the man could answer, Rosie spoke first. Who are you? She set down her piece of cake and stared straight at the stranger, with wide eyes that held not a trace of fear. She tilted her head, studying him from head to toe like a tiny scientist examining a new specimen. Are you going to make Rosie's mommy cry? Edmund was caught off guard. He had met many kinds of people in his life. Powerful men who trembled before him, business rivals who tried to appear calm while sweat soaked through their shirts, traitors who dropped to their knees and begged for mercy. But he had never met anyone who looked directly into his eyes and asked him a question like that. Especially not a 4-year-old child. Edmund turned and crouched down until he was at Rosie's eye level. Gray eyes met brown eyes, and neither looked away. I will never make your mommy cry. I promise. Rosie tilted her head again, still not satisfied. She lifted her hand and pointed at the scar on his temple. Did that hurt? It looks like it hurt a lot. Edmund touched the scar. an unconscious gesture he often made when the past came back to him. It was a long time ago. It doesn't hurt anymore. Rosie studied the scar for a moment, then looked down at her mother. She spoke softly, as if sharing a secret. Rosie's mommy hurts too, but you can't see it. Both Edmund and Meredith fell silent. The words of a 4-year-old child hung in the air, heavier than any accusation. A little girl who didn't understand the world of adults, didn't understand betrayal or pain or the invisible scars people carried for the rest of their lives. But she could feel it. She could see what grown-ups tried to hide. Edmund rose to his feet and turned to Meredith. For the first time, he looked at her closely, not through a video screen, not from a distance through an assistant's report, but directly, close enough to see the fatigue beneath her eyes, close enough to see the way she instinctively drew Rosie nearer to her side in protection. Your daughter is very special. Meredith placed a hand on Rosie's shoulder, her voice calm but guarded. She's everything to me. Edmund nodded, as if that answer confirmed something he had already known. I know, he said. That's why I'm here. A cafe employee walked over, holding a bright swirl of colorful lollipops. She's so adorable. Can she have one, ma'am? Rosie looked at her mother expectantly. Meredith nodded. Rosie let out a delighted little squeal, took the lollipop, and ran to the corner of the room where a few picture books for children were stacked. Edmund waited until Rosie had settled down at a distance, then turned back to Meredith. You don't remember me. Meredith frowned. I've never met you. You have. Once. 5 years ago. Edmund paused, watching her reaction. At your father's office. In Vermont. Meredith went still. Her hand tightened around the coffee cup until her knuckles turned white. Edmund knew. He knew who she was. I'm Edmund Cross, one of Pierce Ashford's business partners. Edmund continued, his voice calm, as if he were speaking about the weather. I went to his office to sign a partnership agreement. You walked past the sitting room, said nothing, only gave a small nod in greeting and kept going. At the time, I didn't know who you were, but I remembered the orchid ring on your necklace. Meredith's hand rose unconsciously to her chest, touching the silver ring hidden beneath her blouse. You know my father? We've been business partners for almost 10 years. Edmund nodded. And I was also the man standing in the corner of the yard at your daughter's birthday party. Meredith remembered. The party. All those unfamiliar faces. She hadn't paid attention to anyone because she had been too busy serving the guests and taking care of Rosie. You were the one who sent me the lawyer's card. She spoke slowly, the pieces beginning to fall into place. You paid for the lawyer. Yes. And what happened to Bradley? Losing his job, losing Tanya, losing the house. Meredith looked straight into Edmund's eyes. That was you too? Edmund didn't answer directly. He only said, his life was built on sand. I merely let the wind blow through it. Silence stretched between them. Meredith tried to process everything she had just heard. A stranger had been watching her from a distance. He had helped her find the best divorce attorney in Chicago. He had dismantled her ex-husband's life, all without saying a word. Why? She finally asked. I didn't ask anyone to do those things. I don't know you. I know, Edmund replied. That's exactly why I did it. I don't understand. Edmund looked at her for a moment, as if considering how to explain something complicated. That night, I stood in the corner of the yard and watched 47 people see you humiliated. Your husband shoved your face into your own daughter's birthday cake. Your mother-in-law stood there laughing. Your husband's mistress pulled out her phone and filmed it, and not one of those 47 people did a thing. He paused, and his voice dropped lower. I didn't do anything either. I just stood there and watched, and I hated that feeling. Meredith stayed silent, waiting. Then you stood up, frosting all over your face. 47 people staring at you, and the first thing you did was wipe frosting from your cheek and give it to your daughter. Edmund spoke slowly. You didn't cry. You didn't scream. You didn't run away. You protected your daughter before you protected yourself. He looked directly into Meredith's eyes. I didn't want to be the 48th person who stood there and did nothing. Not a second time. Silence again. Meredith swallowed, her throat dry and bitter. But you don't know me. You don't owe me anything. I don't need to know you. And you're right. I don't owe you anything, Edmund said. I only needed to know that you didn't deserve to be treated that way. No one does. Meredith looked at him for a long moment, searching for some sign of falsehood, some calculating glance, some smile with an ulterior purpose. She had been deceived by one man for 4 years. Trust didn't come easily to her anymore. But she found nothing. Only gray eyes looking back at her plainly, without evasion. "What do you want from me?" Edmund rose to his feet. He took a business card from his shirt pocket and placed it gently on the table in front of Meredith. "Nothing," he said. "I only want you to know one thing." "What?" Edmund looked at her one last time before turning away. "You're not alone." Then he walked out of the cafe, the bell above the door chiming softly behind him. Meredith sat still for a while, watching the tall figure disappear beyond the glass door. Her fingers held the business card, brushing lightly over the words Edmund Cross, the phone number, and nothing more. Rosie came running back from the corner of the room, the lollipop now half gone in her hand. "Mommy, did that man leave?" "Yes, sweetheart." "Is he nice, Mommy?" Meredith looked at her daughter, then down at the card in her hand. "I don't know yet, sweetheart." But for the first time in many years, someone had stepped forward to protect her without asking for anything in return. Meredith kept the business card for 7 days. She left it on her nightstand, looking at it every morning when she woke, and every night before she went to sleep. Edmund Cross, a name, a phone number, and thousands of questions with no answers. She had called her father on the 3rd day and asked about Edmund. Pierce Ashford had gone quiet for a long moment on the other end of the line, then said only, "He's a good man, my girl, one of the few men I trust." He offered no further explanation, and Meredith didn't ask for one. On the 7th day, she picked up the phone and dialed the number. Edmund answered on the first ring, as if he had been waiting for the call. "Meredith, it wasn't a question, only recognition." "I want to meet you," she said directly. "I have a lot of questions." "Lincoln Park, 3 o'clock. I'll be there." They met on a stone bench beneath the shade of an old oak tree. Rosie ran straight to the swings the moment she saw them, her clear laughter floating across the park. Meredith sat down, leaving a hand's width of space between herself and Edmund. For a long time, neither of them said anything. At last, Meredith spoke. "I want to know more about you. Why do you care so much about other people's lives? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. So why?" Edmund didn't answer right away. He looked off into the distance, toward Rosie swinging high into the air, her brown hair flying in the wind. His hand lifted unconsciously and touched the scar at his temple. "When I was 14, my mother remarried." Distant, Meredith stayed silent, waiting. "My father died when I was very young. My mother raised me alone, taking any work she could to keep us alive. She was exhausted. She was lonely. Then she met a man. He had money, status, knew exactly how to say all the right things. She thought she had found someone who would shelter her." Edmund paused and drew in a slow breath. "But after the wedding, he changed. He treated my mother terribly. Not with his hands, at least not at first. With words, with control, with the kind of cruelty that makes a woman believe she doesn't deserve anything better." Meredith felt her throat tighten. She understood that feeling. She had lived with it for 4 years. One day I came home early and found my mother crying. He was standing there, face red, shouting things at her that no one should ever have to hear. Edmund spoke slowly, his voice lowering. I stepped between them. I told him to stop. He touched the scar again. I was 14, thin and weak. He was nearly 2 heads taller than I was, but I couldn't stand there and watch my mother be treated that way. Silence settled between them. He threw me into the wall. I fell, and my head struck the edge of a table. Edmund pointed to the scar. "This is the only thing he left me, a permanent reminder." Meredith looked at the scar, her heart filling with feelings she couldn't quite name. "What about your mother?" Edmund lowered his eyes to his hands. She was too afraid to act. She was scared. She believed she had no other choice. She thought if she left him, she wouldn't be able to support me. He paused. She endured it for 3 more years, until I was 17, earning my own money, and I told her we didn't need him. "Did she leave?" "Yes," Edmund nodded. But too late. She had already broken apart inside. 3 years later, she died of heart disease. The doctors said it was from prolonged stress. Meredith said nothing. She knew there were no words large enough to comfort a grief like that. Edmund turned and looked at her, his gray eyes deep and still. "From that day on, I made myself one promise. When I grew up, when I had the means, I would never allow any woman to endure what my mother endured. No one deserves to be treated that way. No one. Meredith looked at him and began to understand. So that's why you helped me? Because I reminded you of your mother? Edmund gave a faint shake of his head. When I watched your video, I saw my mother's eyes. The endurance, the silence, the loneliness of standing in a crowd with no one stepping forward to defend you. He paused and looked directly at her. But you were different from my mother in one way. How? You didn't break. Edmund's voice carried something close to admiration. My mother collapsed slowly, a little more each day, until there was nothing left in her to collapse. But you stood up, frosting all over your face. 47 people watching you. Your husband had just humiliated you in front of all of them, and the first thing you did was feed some frosting to your daughter and carry her away. He shook his head. You didn't cry. You didn't beg. You didn't scream or curse or make a scene. You simply protected your daughter and walked away with your dignity still intact. Edmund looked toward Rosie, laughing on the swings. You are strong in a way I've never seen before, and that's why I'm here. Meredith sat in silence, not knowing what to say. She looked at the man beside her, the man with the scar at his temple and the cold gray eyes, yet carrying inside him the old pain of a 14-year-old boy who hadn't been able to protect his mother. And for the first time, she truly understood why he had done all of it. After that afternoon in the park, everything began to change. Edmund didn't disappear the way Meredith thought he would. He appeared again the following weekend, carrying a small teddy bear for Rosie and a box of pastries from the most famous French bakery in Chicago for Meredith. He didn't stay long, only enough to drink a cup of coffee and listen to Rosie talk about her day at school. Then he came back the next week, and the week after that. Meredith didn't ask why. She didn't send him away either. There was something about Edmund that made her feel safe, something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Maybe it was the way he always kept a respectful distance. Maybe it was the way he listened when she spoke without interrupting or judging her. Maybe it was the way he looked at Rosie with a gentleness she had never once seen in Bradley. Rosie, on the other hand, didn't need a reason to like someone. She only needed to feel, and she felt that Uncle Edmund was a good person. One late autumn afternoon, when the leaves had begun turning brilliant shades of gold and orange, the three of them went out for ice cream together. The little ice cream shop sat on a street corner, charming and small, with curved French-style iron chairs and the sweet scent of vanilla drifting through the air. Rosie ordered strawberry ice cream with lots of colorful sprinkles on top. Edmund ordered a simple vanilla scoop. Meredith ordered chocolate, just like her mother used to love. Afterward, they walked slowly down the little street. Golden leaves drifted across the sidewalk. The late afternoon sunlight slipped through the branches and scattered shimmering ribbons of light across the pavement. Rosie walked in the middle, her left hand holding tightly to her mother's, her right hand reaching up to hold Edmund's. She looked up at the two grown-ups, her eyes shining. "This looks like a family, Mommy," Meredith blushed. She was about to pull Rosie's hand away, about to explain that Uncle Edmund was only a friend, about to say something, anything, to break the moment. But Edmund didn't let go of Rosie's hand. He kept walking, as if Rosie's words were the most natural thing in the world, as if holding the hand of a 4-year-old child and strolling down the street on an autumn afternoon were something he did every day. Meredith looked at him and saw that he was staring straight ahead, but the corner of his mouth had lifted ever so slightly. They stopped at a stone bench in a little park. Rosie climbed up and sat in the middle, her legs swinging because they didn't quite reach the ground. She turned to Edmund, her wide eyes suddenly serious, as though she were thinking about something very important. "Uncle Edmund." "What is it, Rosie? Does your hurt still hurt?" Edmund touched the scar on his temple, an unconscious gesture. "No, it was a long time ago. It doesn't hurt anymore." Rosie tilted her head, not satisfied with that answer. "But it's still there. Rosie can still see it." "Scars stay there forever, Rosie. But they don't keep hurting." Rosie thought for a moment. Then she stood up on the stone bench, almost as tall as Edmund while he was sitting down. "Let Rosie blow on it for you." Edmund frowned slightly. "Blow on what?" "Mommy always blows on Rosie when Rosie gets hurt," she explained, in the solemn voice of a little doctor discussing treatment. "Rosie falls down. Mommy blows all soft, and then it stops hurting. Let Rosie blow on you, and you'll never hurt again." Edmund looked at Rosie, then looked at Meredith. Meredith gave a small nod, a faint smile passing across her lips. He lowered his head until the scar was level with Rosie's eyes. Rosie placed her 2 tiny hands on either side of his face and tilted her head, studying the scar very carefully. Then she drew in a deep breath and blew softly across it. "Pfft, all done," she announced, her face glowing with joy. "Now you'll never hurt again. Rosie promises." Edmund went completely still. He sat there with his head still bowed, his eyes fixed somewhere far away. Rosie's tiny hands were still resting against his cheeks, warm and soft. No one had ever done that for him. He had carried that scar for almost 20 years. People looked at it with curiosity. They asked about it with fascination. They were afraid of it because it made him look dangerous. But no one had ever thought about healing it. No one had ever cared whether it still hurt. Until now. Until a 4-year-old child with clear, bright eyes and a heart that had never yet learned the cruelty of the world. Edmund lifted his head and looked at Rosie. Then he turned and looked at Meredith. In his eyes, something had changed. The layer of cold ice he always carried with him seemed to melt a little. Only a little, but enough for Meredith to see it. She felt tears rising in her eyes. She didn't know how much what Rosie had just done meant to Edmund. She didn't know that her little daughter had just touched a wound, far deeper than the scar on his skin. Rosie hopped down from the bench and ran off after a yellow butterfly drifting across the park. Edmund watched her in silence for a long moment. "You've raised her very well," he said, his voice lower than usual. Meredith gave a soft shake of her head. "She's just like that on her own. I didn't teach her that. She just has a very warm heart." Edmund kept looking at Rosie as she happily chased the butterfly, her clear laughter floating through the park. Like her mother. Meredith turned to look at him. Edmund turned to look at her. They held each other's gaze for a long moment, saying nothing, needing to say nothing. Some things don't need words to be understood. 2 months later, Meredith took Rosie back to Vermont. The Ashford estate received them beneath rows of oak trees that had already shed all their leaves, their bare branches stretching into the gray winter sky like arms waiting to welcome them home. Pierce Ashford stood at the door, his eyes red-rimmed when he saw his daughter and granddaughter stepping out of the car. He held Meredith for a long time without saying a word. Then he lifted Rosie into his arms, letting her touch his silver beard while she laughed with bright delight. Meredith had told her father everything, about the 4 years of marriage, about Bradley, about the birthday party, about Edmund. Everything. After hearing it all, Pierce had said only one sentence. "You're home now. That's the only thing that matters." Life in Vermont was peaceful and slow. Rosie had an entire garden to run through, a pond full of fish to watch, and a gardener who told her fairy tales every afternoon. She began to forget the painful memories of Chicago, began to laugh more, began to call Pierce Grandpa with a cheerful little voice. Edmund came to visit every weekend. He and Pierce sat in the library drinking tea, talking about business and sometimes about other things. Meredith never asked what they discussed. She only noticed the way her father looked at Edmund with a kind of approval he rarely gave anyone. One morning, near the end of the month, while fog still lay across the fields, the security cameras at the estate gate captured the image of a woman standing outside. Pamela Norton. She wore an old coat, her hair uncombed and wild, dark circles under her eyes as though she hadn't slept for many nights. She rang the gate bell once, then again, then again. Security notified Meredith. She meant to go down and refused to see her, but before she could even reach the door, a familiar black car had already come to a stop outside the gate. Edmund stepped out. Pamela looked at the stranger with open confusion. "Who are you? What do you want?" Edmund stood a few steps away from her, his gray eyes cold as winter steel. "I'm the man who stood in the corner of the yard on Rosie's birthday," he said slowly. "I heard you say, 'It's about time,' when your daughter-in-law was humiliated in front of nearly 50 people. Pamela went pale. She stumbled back one step, nearly catching her heel on the curb. Edmund continued, his voice perfectly even. "I'm also the man who made your son lose his job, lose his mistress, lose his house, lose everything." Pamela began to tremble, her lips moving without sound. "What do you want from me?" "I want you to leave, and never come back here again." "But I only want to see my granddaughter," Pamela pleaded now, tears beginning to spill down her face. "I know I was wrong. I want to apologize. I just want to see Rosie once." The iron gate opened. Meredith stepped out, Rosie beside her, one little hand clutching the fabric of her mother's skirt. Pamela saw her granddaughter and her eyes lit up. "Rosie, it's Grandma. I've missed you so much. Can Grandma have one hug?" Rosie looked at her grandmother. She didn't run forward. She didn't smile. She simply stood there, half hidden behind her mother's leg, her wide eyes studying the woman in front of her with the careful suspicion of a child who had already learned not to trust easily. "Rosie, sweetheart." Pamela tried to smile, but the smile broke crookedly across her face. "Grandma brought candy for you. You like candy?" Rosie shook her head. "Rosie doesn't like Grandma." Pamela stood frozen. Grandma said, "It's about time." When Daddy got cake all over Mommy's face. Rosie's voice was small, but clear. Rosie heard it. Grandma laughed. Grandma didn't help Mommy. Silence. A 4-year-old child remembered everything. Every detail. Who had laughed? Who had said what? Who had stood there watching and done nothing? Meredith placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder. Gentle but steady. "Mrs. Norton, my daughter has answered you." She turned and led Rosie back inside. The iron gate closed behind them. Pamela stood outside alone in the cold fog of a Vermont winter morning. Tears ran down her face, but there was no one left there to see them. She had lost her son to the carelessness of his own character. She had lost her granddaughter to the memory a child could never erase. And she had lost her chance at forgiveness to her own words and actions. Karma doesn't need anyone to take revenge. It only needs time and the truth. A year passed. Bradley Norton was no longer the man of expensive suits and confident smiles. He worked at an electronics store in the outskirts of Chicago now, the kind of retail place with flickering neon lights and pop music playing on endless repeat all day long. Minimum wage. A blue company uniform with the logo printed across the back. 8-hour shifts spent standing without rest. Irritated customers asking the same questions over and over again about warranty policies. It was the only job he had been able to find after 10 months of unemployment. No one in real estate wanted to hire a man rumored to have committed contract fraud, even if it was only a rumor. The reputation he had spent 6 years building had collapsed in just a few weeks. The connections he had believed were solid vanished, as though they had never existed. Bradley lived in a cheap rented room now, sharing a bathroom with 3 other strangers. He lived on instant noodles and bargain bread. His car had been repossessed by the bank long ago. He took the bus to work, standing shoulder to shoulder with the kind of people he once wouldn't have bothered to look at. One afternoon, during his short lunch break, Bradley went to a nearby grocery store to buy food, 1 prepackaged sandwich and 1 bottle of water. That was all he could afford. He stood in line waiting to pay, his eyes wandering absently around him. The magazine rack stood beside the checkout counter. Forbes, Time, Vogue, the magazines he used to subscribe to for years, leaving them on his coffee table as a way of impressing clients. Then he saw it. Forbes. This month's issue. On the cover was a woman in an elegant navy dress. Her chestnut brown hair was styled neatly. Her smile was gentle, but confident. Standing beside her was an older man with silver hair and a commanding presence. The headline was printed in bold letters. Meredith Ashford. Ashford Holdings heiress makes her first public appearance. Bradley went completely still. He looked at the photograph once, twice, 3 times. It was Meredith, his ex-wife. The woman whose face he had shoved into birthday cake. The woman he had looked down on, cheated on, dismissed as nothing more than a restaurant server with nothing special about her. With trembling hands, he picked up the magazine. Ashford Holdings. He knew the name. Everyone in real estate knew it. A giant corporation with projects stretching across America and Europe. 5-star hotels, high-end casinos, million-dollar resorts, an empire worth billions. And Meredith was the sole heir. Bradley flipped through the pages, searching for the main article. He read every line, his eyes widening more and more. Meredith Ashford, daughter of Pierce Ashford, one of the richest businessmen in America. She had lived under a false name for years, using her mother's surname in search of true love. Now, she was officially stepping into the leadership of her family's empire. The woman he had once looked down on could have bought the company he used to work for without a second thought. She could have bought his entire life. But she had done nothing. She had chosen silence, chosen to love him with real love, chosen to live like an ordinary woman, to work for her money, cook meals, wash clothes, raise their child. She had given him the chance to be loved for who he truly was, and he had answered with betrayal, with Tanya, with nights spent away from home, with shoving her face into birthday cake in front of nearly 50 people, with signing away his rights as a father so he wouldn't have to repay $87,000. $87,000. He had traded his daughter for an amount of money that, to Meredith, was little more than pocket change. "Hey, are you buying that or not? You've been holding up the line forever." The voice behind him dragged Bradley back to reality. He set the magazine back on the rack, paid for the sandwich and bottle of water, then walked outside. He didn't go back to the store. He sat down on the sidewalk just outside the grocery store, his back against the cold brick wall. The sandwich box lay beside him, unopened. He stared into nothing. And for the first time in his 31 years of life, Bradley Norton cried. Not because he had lost money, not because he had lost his job, not because his life had become miserable, but because for the first time, he truly understood what he had lost. A woman who had loved him for who he truly was. A little daughter with eyes just like her mother's. A family he had once held in his hands. And he had thrown all of it away for shallowness, for greed, for an ego with no bottom. There would be no second chance, no opportunity to make it right, no road back. That was the heaviest punishment karma could give him. Not losing money, not losing status, but living the rest of his life with the knowledge that he had destroyed the most precious thing in the world with his own 2 hands. 6 months after the divorce papers were finalized, the Ashford estate was filled with the rich fragrance of Thanksgiving. A golden roasted turkey rested at the center of the long dining table, creamy butter mashed potatoes, bright red cranberry sauce, and a pumpkin pie that Edmund had brought from the most famous bakery in Boston. 4 people sat around the table, Pierce at the head, Meredith to his right, Rosie to his left, and Edmund seated across from Pierce. It was the first time Edmund had been invited to a family dinner. Pierce watched the man nearly 30 years younger than himself, with a measured, thoughtful gaze. He said nothing, only served himself food, and observed the way Edmund cut Rosie's turkey for her, the way he poured water for Meredith before pouring any for himself, the way he listened when she spoke. In the middle of dinner, Rosie set down her fork and looked around the table with the solemn expression of a child, about to ask something very important. "Mommy, is Uncle Edmund your boyfriend?" The whole table fell silent. Pierce raised a hand to his mouth and pretended to cough, trying to hide the smile threatening to break free. Meredith blushed so hard she nearly choked on her potatoes. "Uncle Edmund is Mommy's friend, sweetheart." Rosie tilted her head, not satisfied with that answer. "Best friend, Mommy? Like me and Lily at school?" Edmund set down his knife and fork and turned to Rosie with the most serious expression he could manage. "I'm trying to get promoted, Rosie. But I have to wait for your mommy to approve it first." Rosie thought about that for a moment, then nodded as though she were a judge carefully weighing the matter. "Mommy, let him get promoted. He brought really good pie." Pierce burst out laughing then, unable to hold it in any longer. Meredith didn't know whether to laugh or cry, and could only shake her head as she looked at her daughter. Edmund smiled, and his gray eyes looked warmer than ever when he turned toward Meredith. A year later, autumn came again. Rosie was 5 now, and it was her first day of kindergarten. She stood in front of the school gate in a new flowered dress, a bunny backpack on her back, her wide eyes watching the other children running into the yard. Meredith knelt down and adjusted her daughter's backpack straps. "Mommy, I'm scared," Rosie whispered. "What if nobody likes me?" Meredith took her daughter's tiny hands in her own and looked into the brown eyes that were exactly like hers. "Do you remember what Mommy told you? An orchid doesn't need to cry out to be noticed. You only need to be yourself, and the people who are meant to love you will find their way to you." Rosie nodded, still a little nervous, but less afraid now. She hugged her mother tightly. Then, unexpectedly, she turned and hugged Edmund, who was standing just behind them. "Uncle Edmund, please take care of Mommy for me. Don't let anybody make her sad." Edmund bent down and hugged her back. "I promise." Rosie smiled, then ran toward the school gate. Just before she disappeared inside, she turned and waved one more time, her brown hair lifting in the autumn wind. Then she was gone beyond the gate. Meredith stood there watching after her, her eyes burning. Her daughter was growing up, stepping into a new world, learning how to face life without her mother always beside her. Edmund stepped up beside her. He said nothing. He only took her hand. For the first time, Meredith felt his hand, warm and steady, closing around hers gently yet with certainty. She didn't pull away. The two of them stood there in front of the school, watching in the direction their daughter had just gone. Their hands joined. Golden leaves drifted down around them like silent blessings. That night, the Vermont sky was clear as black velvet scattered with diamonds. Rosie was fast asleep upstairs, holding tightly to the worn old brown teddy bear she had brought with her from Chicago. Pierce had also withdrawn to his study after dinner, leaving the two younger people alone. Meredith sat on the old wooden chair on the porch, the same place where her mother used to sit on summer nights to watch the stars. The hot tea in her hands gave off soft curls of steam that mingled with the cool air of the late autumn night. Edmund stepped outside and took the chair beside her. Not too close, not too far. Just enough for Meredith to feel his presence without feeling any pressure. They sat in silence for a long while, watching the stars glimmer overhead. At last, Meredith spoke. "Do you regret it?" Edmund turned to look at her. "Regret what?" "Getting involved in my messy life." Meredith said it softly, almost like a breath. "A single mother, a broken marriage, a past full of things no one wants to touch." Edmund didn't answer right away. He lifted his gaze to the star-filled sky, as though searching for the answer among all those scattered lights. "Before I met you, my life was nothing but power and money. Everyone who looked at me was either afraid or wanted to use me. No one looked at me like I was an ordinary man. No one cared about the scar on my head except out of curiosity or fear." He turned to her then, his gray eyes deep in the dim silver light of the night. "Then I met you. A woman being treated cruelly in front of dozens of people. And the first thing you did wasn't cry, wasn't scream, wasn't run away. It was feed your daughter frosting." Meredith smiled faintly. "I told you. That was only a mother's instinct." Edmund shook his head. "No, that was love. The kind of love I had never seen before. The kind of love I've been searching for my whole life without even knowing I was searching." He took her hand gently, his fingers brushing the silver orchid ring hanging from the chain she still wore. "You asked if I regret it. The answer is no." Meredith looked at him, waiting. "Because for the first time in my life," Edmund said it slowly, as if speaking something he had never said to anyone before, "I have something worth losing." Meredith felt her heart begin to beat faster. She smiled, a real smile, one that cost her no effort at all, one that needed no disguise and no protection. "Do you know how an orchid blooms?" Edmund shook his head, in silence. Meredith's voice was light as a passing breeze. "It doesn't need to cry out to be noticed. It simply blooms quietly, and the whole world finds its way to admire it." Edmund tightened his hold on her hand. "I know, and I'm willing to wait." They sat there, hand in hand, looking up at the star-filled sky. The autumn wind moved softly around them, carrying the scent of dry leaves and the promise of a new beginning. No more words were needed. Some people enter your life like a storm. They destroy everything and then leave, abandoning wreckage and wounds that never fully heal. But there are also people who arrive in silence. They stay like sunlight after rain, warming every dark corner of your soul without asking for anything in return. Orchids bloom in silence, and those who bloom in darkness will, in the end, become the light others seek. Sometimes the quietest person is the one who holds the greatest power. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel so you can hear more meaningful stories every day. Please share this video with the people you love, with anyone who needs a reminder that orchids still bloom even in the darkest shadow. We would truly love to know how you feel about Meredith and Edmund's story. Have you ever met someone like that in your life? What do you think about the way she faced hardship? Leave a comment below so we can hear what your heart wants to say. Every word you share is encouragement for us to keep bringing you even more beautiful stories. We also want to wish everyone watching this video good health, a joyful life, and peaceful days beside the people you love most. Thank you for staying with us. Goodbye, and we'll see you in the next video.